Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am, for those of you who don't know me, Melanie with HomeProbe, the home inspection company, and you are at a webinar where we're going to talk about listing inspections. And I'm going to share some really fun information with you. And if you have questions, stay afterwards and I'll be happy to answer them. So let's get started with why we're even talking about all of this. And I'm going to go back to the first time I ever bought a house. So I bought this house and my heart is still there. But you can see it was probably an inspector, and the inspector had a heyday with it when we bought it. And when I bought it, there were lots of things that needed to be fixed. This is one of the things. You can see these stairs here that probably needed to be fixed. Some of them were like this big, some of them were like this big. They were all over the place. They were falling in, they were sinking. And all of the work that we did on the house, the stairs just never were one of the things that we wanted to work on. My kids have since told me we had only street parking, and so I had to haul them up and down those stairs the whole time that we lived there. And my kids told me that they used to actually pretend like they were sleeping in the car so that I would carry them and they wouldn't have to walk the stairs. So that is the story of my stairs. When I went to sell the house, this is what it looks like. So you can see we did a lot of work on that house. We got rid of that cat door on the front. We put some columns and some railings on that porch, took off the asbestos shingles and put clapboard on, and really did a lot of work inside the house as well. But one thing we didn't do was fix the stairs. So it just never was worth the money to me. I would rather walk the stairs than pay the money to fix them. Fast forward to selling the house. It was very much a market like today, a huge seller's market. And we got an offer the very first weekend, and the inspection happened that next week. And in the meantime, I went and put my money, and earnest money, and an offer on another house that I really wanted, and made it contingent on the sale of my house. Inspection day comes, no big surprises that we were able to determine from the inspection report until we get the amendment, and we were notified by our realtor that the buyer wanted us to pay for a new set of stairs. And the reason why is because the inspector had called the stairs a safety hazard. And so my first reaction as a seller, I didn't work in the inspection business and I didn't know anything about it. And so my first reaction as a seller was they had to walk up those stairs in order to make an offer on the house. Why are they asking for it now? Like, I felt like we had priced our house according to the fact that the stairs were a little bit, in our words, janky. So, but because the inspector had written it up as a safety condition, they felt like they had the right to ask for it. Of course, we could have said no, it was $12,000. But again, by this point in the transaction, I am now a buyer on another property that I really want and don't want to lose this deal because it will mean I lose the next house. And so the common consensus from everybody we talked to was we should just split it. So just splitting $12,000 is $6,000 that I would have had in my check that I got from the house and didn't. So fast forward about 8 to 10 years, and I come work for HomeProbe. And one of the first things that I learned two things really quickly. One, home inspections in Georgia are not licensed. So that was a pretty big eye-opening experience for me. By then, I had already bought and sold several houses. And the second thing I learned about that I remember really vividly was what's called a listing inspection. And so when I learned about it, it's an inspection that's done for the seller before they list their house, so that when offers are made, all of the things in the inspection report are assumed wrong with the house, and anything that would be asked for later would be something newly discovered. And I remember going back to my stairs on my first house that I sold and thinking, what? This is a thing? I had no idea this even existed. And I made a commitment then, and I can't ever see changing my mind on this. I will never sell a house again without a pre-listing inspection. And so today we are going to talk about why. So I feel like now what I did in the spring of this year, I've heard anecdotally why it's good. I realized pretty immediately why it was a good thing to do. But what I have done is actually pulled the data to be able to prove those stories correct, the numbers behind those stories, and that's what I'm going to share today. And when I pulled the data to prove just how effective a listing inspection was, I went from just thinking, what? I didn't know that was a thing, to my hair is on fire and I want every seller to know about it. So the easiest way that I can tell sellers about a pre-listing inspection is to tell the people who talk to sellers, and that would be you, the real estate agent. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. The 5 reasons that we recommend a listing inspection as the move for your sellers to, quote unquote, win the transaction, or sometimes we call it move before your neighbor, make more money. We'll talk about all of those reasons. So let's go with the first one. The seller success rate for homes that have had a pre-listing inspection is 4 times, that's 400% higher. And this is the data that we pulled. So the image on the left of the screen is the success rate without a listing inspection. 72% of homes sell and are not considered a failed listing, so selling within the first 90 days, and 28% of them fail. So a little more than 1 in 4 homes do not sell in the first 90 days. If you get a pre-listing inspection, your rate goes up to 93% sold. So there's only a 7% chance that that house won't sell in the first 90 days. You go from a C- to a solid A. That's a pretty impressive amount. And particularly for you who are making, you only get paid if the house actually sells. And so failed listings definitely affect your bottom line. And they also affect the seller's bottom line. You know, that's one of the things I was afraid of being a seller, is that I was going to have a failed listing. So let's talk a little bit about where that statistic probably comes from and the reasons behind it. The first one is that a lot of sellers are not emotionally prepared for what will show up on the inspection report immediately. So they think that they're just going to put their head in the sand and that these issues are never going to come up. The problem is that for the seller is that 80% of homes in 2003 had an inspection, 90% in 2015. You can see that number only went up. I don't have any more current of a statistic, but I know some homes go through the inspection process more than once in the sale. And so the idea that you could just put your head in the sand goes back to this meme, that this is what happens when you put your head in the sand. The second reason that we can avoid a failed listing probably goes to this idea, and that is perception and reality meeting up together. So let's look at what happens in a seller's transaction. From the mind of the seller, this is kind of what their house looks like. The White House, the Taj Mahal, you know, they have put all this work into it and all this love into it. And it's almost like everyone's lucky they're going to put it on the market and that they would even let the buyer experience the sale. The buyer looks at the house a little more like this, like, oh, I don't know what's going on with it. Oftentimes they're in love, but they have a little bit of buyer's remorse by the time they get to the inspection. And so making those ideas, the perceptions of both the buyer and seller, mimic a little bit better of reality is what a pre-listing inspection will do. Because here you have an objective report. We consider the house to be our client. And so we are presenting, it's like a snapshot of the house in time in terms of its technical condition. The second reason that there are fewer failed listings is because we see conditions ahead of time. This actually came from one of our inspection reports. This is what their pier looks like in their crawl space. And so I want to ask you when you think that information is going to be most effective for your seller to have. Is it most effective to know that this is what exists in your crawl space after you've negotiated the contract and listed the house, or before? Goes back to this meme a little bit. If you're worried about the seller not being emotionally ready to handle the items in the inspection report, do you want them to find that out? Would you rather they find that out right upon getting the listing, or would you rather invest your time and money into presenting the listing and the photographs and the staging and all of the work that you do just to find out that there's a really big problem that they're not able to resolve later? The other reason that we can avoid some failed listings has to do with the seller's budget and where they put that money. I would rather, and likely after the fact at least, they would rather spend their money to get the house ready to put on the market on the items that are going to be most effective for them. And a seller, because they don't do this every day like you do, probably doesn't know where. And so if you ask them what's going to be most effective, it is probably on some cosmetic things. And cosmetic things probably need to be done as well. But if there are big conditions, underlying conditions that need to be addressed, painting your house the trendy beige color to make it very neutral, and only to find out that you don't have enough money to deal with the crawl space or the roof, probably isn't going to do the seller or their agent much good. The second reason that a pre-listing inspection I would call the move is because this is what every seller wants. You get to sell for more. So when I looked back to every house in 2018 and 2019 that we had done a pre-listing inspection on, I was able to find that those houses, when they went to the market, sold at 2% higher sale price to original list price. And I compared that straight up to the FMLS statistics. So your ROI there on a $500,000 house is about 1,800%. On a $300,000 house is just over 1,000% ROI. On the average sale price of a house that we inspected, that ROI turned into $8,600. Think about 2% in the transaction and how that compares to your fees. If you're charging a standard 6%, you've made up a third of that just by getting a pre-listing inspection. That's a pretty easy sell to your seller. Let's talk about why those numbers are probably that high. The first thing that we learned from our friends Nike and Apple is that packaging really drives price. So by presenting the house with a report of its technical condition, it gives the appearance that it's been well maintained. It gives the appearance that the seller has really cared about its technical condition. And so that packaging really is driving the price. Sort of like staging, it's a technical version of staging the house. We can see an example from the auto industry. If I were to go buy a house or a car on Facebook Marketplace, as opposed to going to a dealer and buying a pre-certified car, where would I expect to pay more? At the dealer with a pre-certified car. You can see that there is a checkpoint, there's an inspection of that car. And so when the same thing happens with a house, that packaging really drives the price and gives the appearance of it having a higher value compared with the unknown that buyer would be getting with the house next door. The third reason is that it helps avoid the thought of what else is wrong. So sometimes in the inspection report, you'll just have little things that go that are awry that the inspector points out. Particularly in a flip situation, that starts getting the buyer's mind going, like, if they didn't know they needed to take care of this, what else is wrong? It's sort of like the roach. Every roach you see is evidence of 100 others that you don't see. That's the perception that buyers often have. Again, like I said, particularly in a flip situation, of what else could be wrong. If these obvious things are wrong, what else might be wrong? And the final reason has to do with renegotiations. So think about the transaction. You put a house on the market, the buyer comes and says what they'll pay for it, the seller and the buyer go back and forth and finally make an agreement. And so you have an agreement on a price. Let's say it's $200,000. If the buyer comes back and wants to renegotiate, what are the chances that your seller loses, that their price point goes down? 100%. So there's never a time that the inspection happens and the buyer comes back and says, you know what, we'd love to pay you even more for that house than we originally negotiated. The inspector just said it's a beautiful, gorgeous house, so let's go higher than the price we both agreed on before. That never happens. And here's why. When a seller looks at a repair, they look at a $1 an actual price of the repair, but the buyer perceives that repair to be a $3 repair. They ask for $3, statistics show, compared for every $1 of actual repairs. Part of that is because they don't know how the repair is actually going to go. Part of that is because they feel like you'll split it in the end, and that gives them some wiggle room in terms of splitting it. But the reality is your seller loses every time you negotiate repairs after the initial negotiation. Let's look at some actual numbers. So this first example that we're going to look at, our seller is actually determining that bottom line price. Their bottom line is affecting the negotiations and what they say is acceptable versus not acceptable. So on the left-hand side, we have without a pre-listing inspection, the seller has a bottom line that they believe is $500,000. The contract comes in for $505,000. So the seller is like, yeah, let's do it. I'm going to make a lot of money. They didn't have a listing inspection, so now we have an inspection, and we have a $10,000 surprise, or at least that's what the buyer says the surprise is $10,000. Your seller is going to net $495,000. If you had a pre-listing inspection, when the offer came in at $505,000, you could either make the argument that you would likely push back a little harder. Your seller would want to push back a little harder, and they wouldn't agree with a $505,000. They would go up to $510,000 because they knew about these repairs and they didn't make them yet. They had spent $500 on the inspection report, and they're actually netting their bottom line. They're ensuring that they net their bottom line. Let's look at a different example, which is more like our market now, where the market is really dictating the price, not the seller's bottom line. So we have the same bottom line of the seller, $500,000. We get a contract for $505,000. We have a $10,000 surprise on inspection day, and so we end up with $495,000 as our bottom line. If we did a pre-listing inspection report, we would have disclosed that $10,000 issue ahead of time. And so when we negotiated a price of $505,000, which is the best we could do in this market, your seller ends up netting higher, $504,500. Let's say your seller goes ahead and makes the repairs instead. So that $10,000 repair is probably going to cost about $3,500. I went up to $5,000 here instead. The contract that you're going to be able to negotiate, you've actually improved the market value of the house by making those repairs, and so you're able to get a higher contract, and your seller is going to net more. The third reason that a seller should consider a pre-listing inspection is they will sell 40% faster. So this is the car that my teenage kids keep trying to convince me to buy. They're not going to be driving that while I am buying their core. But let's talk about how your seller can sell faster. When we compared homes that we had done a pre-listing inspection for versus homes that did not have one, we found the days on market were 18 versus 30. Let's talk about why that might be. And the first reason, many of you I'm sure have been involved in a transaction where a house goes on the market, the inspection happens, there's a negotiation to try and address the issues, or the buyer just walks away, and that house has a little bit of an air of being blacklisted. Everybody's wondering, why did the house go back on the market? Take the inspection out of the opportunities for a house to be blacklisted, and your days on market actually shrinks. The second reason that days on market also shrinks is because you're now holding future inspectors accountable to what happened at the first inspection. So if they're finding something, they're having to answer to that first inspection report and answer why they found something different than the first inspection report. Sometimes a condition might change. It's pretty unlikely that a significant condition would change, like the pier falling over. And so usually we're just talking about little issues. The fourth reason for your seller is to stand out in the marketing. Think about all the other things that you do to market a house. Having a listing inspection can help that house stand apart from the other houses in the marketing. So one of the things that we will do on request for you when you have a pre-listing inspection is a flyer like this. We'll ask you for your listing pictures because they're much prettier than our inspection pictures. But then we do a summary of the home inspection report. You're welcome to share the entire report in its entirety with that seller, but we will do just a synopsis if you'd like, and you can make it into flyers for when we physically start going through homes again. And we put a summary of the report on here, and then also some comments. And that comment section is probably the only time in the world of inspections where we see good things about a house. Usually an inspection report reads like no news is good news, but here we actually put some good news. So this is just an example. This well-constructed home is in good condition and has been diligently maintained. We'll put whatever we can find to be truthful about the house. The amps of electrical service, the HVAC systems, how old they are, how much life they probably have left in them. So this is where we would find items like upgrades and technical conditions mentioned as well. Those usually aren't mentioned in the inspection report. So now you talked about how your seller can stand out in their marketing. This next thought is about how you, as the listing agent or the agent hoping to be the listing agent, can stand out in your marketing. Imagine if your seller has invited their list of 3 realtors to come pitch for the listing consultation. And you are the only one that even presents this information to them, that presents, this is an option for you. What I want for you as the listing agent, I don't need you to sell this product. I just want you to share the information with the seller and let them make a decision on whether this is the move for them. You knowing more about how that process works can help share the evidence with them, and then they get to take that decision and make it their own. So think about if they had 3 people come to the house. You're all probably going to be priced similarly based on comps. You're going to try and present the other advantages that you bring. They probably relate to customer service, they probably relate to marketing the home, and they might relate to your, like some reviews about you. Really, it's going to be based on personality at that point and kind of what the seller is looking for. If you are the only one that presents this information, like, hey seller, this is an option that you have. When you work with me, I know how this process works and I can help you. And I have an option that's going to get you 2% more for your list price. So the list prices that we're all talking about, it only matters what you walk away with, not what you listed at. And so I'm going to be able to help you get 2% better on your list price if you follow this process. You get to decide whether it works for you. That helps you as the listing agent who presents this information. 1, you sound more knowledgeable about the market. 2, you sound more knowledgeable about the process of selling. And it helps you stand out from the other agents that are in there doing listing consultations. So you win the listing. The 5th reason is kind of this pie in the sky reason for me, and I hope you will join me in this reason. And I'm really excited about it. You can tell my hair's on fire. I want everyone to know about these. We can lead the industry. So if you ask someone from Mars who came to Earth and saw our process for selling a house, they would say that is crazy. We agree on a price based on some pretty pictures of a house and walking through it, and then we see if the house is really what we think it is, and then we renegotiate a price later. Why don't we do the opposite? Why don't we know the condition of the house and have the pretty pictures and do the walkthrough and just negotiate that one time? Why do these professionals in real estate want to have to keep going back and renegotiating the price of a house? So imagine a world with me, close your eyes, and imagine you only negotiated one time on every transaction. Your seller got to make decisions about what they were going to do with their budget when they had all of the facts and not just part of the facts. Imagine a world where we removed buyer inspections altogether. This isn't our current world, but I believe that it could be if we had leaders in the industry. So join me in leading the industry. A leader is someone who demonstrates what's possible. And this is something that really could be possible. I can give you an example, and that is the market in Toronto. So the company that we use for our inspection reporting is also an inspection company, and they're based out of Toronto. And it used to be that their inspections were primarily buyer inspections. And it's not just based on what the market is doing, but in leading the market, the professionals in the industry actually became a seller's market, and nobody would wait for a buyer inspection altogether. Sellers were just like, if you want the house, you want the house. If not, you don't. And so they started doing listing inspections to help give that buyer some confidence, and have almost removed buyer inspections altogether. So those inspections, 90% of their business roughly comes from listing inspections. I'm going to give you one bonus reason, which is why not? Let's talk about some of the objections that you want to be able to have information about that your sellers may have. And I don't need you to overcome them, but just to be able to talk about them a little bit more. The first objection is we are going to make a mess of this listing. We want the listing to go perfectly smooth, just one straight arrow up, see like that. And when we throw the curveball of a listing inspection in, this might be our reality. I would argue this is going to be your reality anyway, and that that by having the seller invested up front on the listing inspection side, that you are not going to hurt the reality any differently, that you're still going to be able to present a picture of what's going to happen by setting expectations. And this actually gives you the opportunity to set those expectations ahead of time. And that's really the difference between whether someone's disappointed and not disappointed, is whether something meets their expectations. So in setting the expectations, we would talk to a seller and say, a home inspector's job is to not find everything wrong with the house. A home inspector's job is to find the elephants, the big things that might change someone's purchasing decision. Along the way, they will probably find some things the size of an ant. Sometimes finding those things the size of an ant helps identify the big elephants, but they're going to find some little ants. Now, if I told you to go into a house and look for things the size of an ant, there are possibilities that you wouldn't see them all, right? And so a different inspector, even at the same time, might see the house just a little bit differently, but those shouldn't be the $10,000 items. Those should be very minor things. The second concern that sellers, and I would say agents, have is, what if the inspector misses something? This is kind of the elephant in the room in my life. The idea that the inspector wouldn't be doing their job or isn't doing it well enough. What if they quote unquote miss something? Well, let's talk about what happens in that case. Let's say there is a $10,000 repair and your inspector doesn't see it. On the left-hand side, we didn't have a pre-listing inspection. We negotiated 505. There's repairs, surprise repairs of $10,000. We're down to $495. If you have a pre-listing inspection, you negotiate 505, believing there are no repairs. Your seller's already spent $500. Now they have to spend another $10,000 on those surprise repairs. But your inspection company is going to at least refund the amount of the inspection. And so your seller has nothing to lose here. Your seller ends up in the same place they were before at $495, plus they know that they did everything that they possibly could. If you want to sweeten the deal, you can get your seller some mortgage credit back. So there are a couple of ways that sellers can pay for pre-listing inspections without having it actually come out of their pocket. The first one is if you have a concierge program with your real estate brokerage. A lot of those will cover a pre-listing inspection and let your seller use the concierge program to fund it so that they end up paying at closing. As an inspector, we can't be paid at closing because it creates a conflict of interest for us, but we can be paid through the concierge program that your seller eventually funds. The second thing, some mortgage companies are also getting in on this. And so I have an example of Dunwoody Mortgage. Rodney Schaefer is also tired on the buyer side of deals falling through due to inspection. And so he has created a $500 credit on the buy side for anyone who gets a listing inspection on the sell side. So your client's steps are: 1, get a listing inspection on the house that they're selling; 2, buy a house. This is only applicable in Georgia and only applicable if they use Dunwoody Mortgage. And really, they'll get a $500 check at the closing on their buy side, or a mortgage credit. So that best case scenario moves up even $500. I have taken up the amount of time that I told you about. So let's say you really like this idea. You want to start implementing it. You at least want to bring up the subject at your next listing consultation. What do? You're all in. What's next? If this message really resonated with you, here are some next steps. This is my email address. So you can email me, melanie@home-probe.com, and I will be happy to send you a flyer that we made for your client. So this is a flyer you can present at a listing inspection. You can have your name and picture and brokerage information, or you can just have it be branded for Home Probe. But this is a way you can present all of the information that I shared faster. Imagine if your seller, if you said, I have a way you can make 2% more your sale price to list price, you can sell 40% faster, and you're 4 times more likely to sell. That's a really great piece of information to leave, and this is a really easy way to understand it. So request this flyer from me, melanie@home-probe.com. And then my second step for you that I would recommend is that you partner with a pro. And so I want you to think about how professional you are in your real estate business and how seriously you take it. You had to go through a lot of licensing. You have to go through continuing education. And I would suggest that anyone that you put on your team, anyone that you make a recommendation is really on your team, that you make sure that you have vetted them for those same qualifications. Obviously, my heart belongs to Home Probe. I think we do the very best inspection in town, and I've got the numbers to back that up. But regardless, I want you to make sure that your team is a professional team that can really give your clients the same level of service, the same level of expertise at what they do as you do at what you do. Because the clients who pick you to work with are really expecting that. Finally, if you liked this information, I have a lot of fun for you. So the month of September, we are actually breaking down the house piece by piece so that you can catch up on pieces of the house that may be throwing off your transactions or you wish you knew a little bit more about. It is our virtual inspection series, and you can find webinars on homeprobeacademy.com and sign up for those. The first one is going to be Tales from the Crawl Space. You can see this is actually a picture from an inspection we did where the Rubbermaid tub was actually their temporary support. So if you want to know more about crawl spaces or electrical or plumbing, go to homeprobeacademy.com and you can find the webinar. Those are free. We also have 2 continuing education classes that have charges associated with them, but since you came to this webinar, you can use this code, SEPTINSPECT, and sign up for those. One is Anatomy of a House, and the second one is one we have only done in person, but given the state of our world right now, we're doing it virtually, and that is go on an actual inspection with an inspector. So I've got one of my lead inspectors who's going to be doing an inspection of a house I'm pretty familiar with, because it's mine, and I'm really excited. I'm going to follow him around with you. You get to stay on your pajamas while he suits up and goes into my crawl space. And the best of all, you get CE credit, but also you will be able to ask questions that I can ask him on site, and you won't have any worry of it throwing off your deal. So join me for that. That's September 30th. And join me for any of the series. We've got 20 years of experience doing this and lots of pictures from the houses that we've been in to show you a lot of what we see and what you might deal with on inspection reports. And you'll be able to ask Rhea Levin, who used to be an inspector and now teaches these classes for us, lots of questions about how to do the repairs and how to handle it from the inspection report. So I invite you to learn more. Obviously you like to learn, that's why you were here with me. So I am going to turn off the recording and answer any questions. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for making your business better. I really appreciate that as somebody who relies on your businesses.